Hey everybody, welcome back to another video, and this time we are talking about more Transformers, the IDW Collection Volume 2, and we're wrapping this up by talking about the 6 spotlight issues that make up the end of this. And the next 2 videos are going to be kind of spotlight heavy. This is going to be 6 spotlights, and then the next Transformers review is going to be another 3 spotlights. And I could review them together, but I want to keep all of these as separate collections, just because it makes more sense as a whole. Another option could have been just to take the 3 spotlights that open Volume 3 and the 2 spotlights that close it and review all of those together. But again, it's about the progression. We're supposed to kind of work from one of these to the next, and so it just makes more sense to split them up the way they're split up. So this time we've got, at the end of Escalation, Megatron has a very big dramatic page where he's like, "Bring me Six Shot." And so the very next spotlight is Spotlight Six Shot. The Six Shot takes place in a different outpost. It doesn't have anything to do with Earth yet, doesn't have anything to do with Cybertron yet. And essentially you meet this Decepticon, as you know, named Six Shot, that is extremely powerful, that he's basically the Decepticon's big secret weapon. And more than that, he's just insanely powerful in his transformations and weaponry. Like, he's got multiple transformations, he's got multiple weapons, he's got incredible destructive power, he's just kind of unstoppable. And so the big thing throughout this issue is he's got all this power, but he feels kind of hollow. Like, he doesn't really have like a sense of who he is or what he wants or anyone that cares about him or any kind of like real genuine humanity to him, except for this group of Decepticons that he works with that end up getting captured. And so he decides to go and figure out what happened to them, and there he meets this other group of, well, they're not Transformers, I don't think, they're robot types. This other group of aliens that he's trying to take down that has captured his team, and their whole thing all the way through this is to basically cleanse planets. They have this whole mentality of the world is just the entire universe is bleeding its resources dry, sustaining wars that are not sustainable. And so instead of seeing planets get taken up by this escalating war, we'll just take the planets out of the equation. So this Autobots, Decepticons fighting over this world, boom, blown up. Now you can't fight over it. And it's a really radical, kind of nonsensical solution to things, but it's interesting. And it's interesting that because they're so powerful, they are completely dehumanized in that way, and they don't really seem to understand the bigger toll of what they're doing. And so Six Shot is recruited by them, or is asked to join them, and he refuses. He takes his team back and then flies away, and then we'll pick up with him later when Megatron orders him to Earth. After that, we get Spotlight Ramjet. Now, Spotlight Ramjet is the only Spotlight issue, as far as I know, that has nothing to do with anything. It is a random issue that's fun to read and does nothing for the greater mythology of the Transformers universe or the ongoing story of Simon Furman. Spotlight Ramjet is essentially a ramjet going around bragging about how Megatron's an idiot and how he's got a much better plan to take out the Autobots, and how like everything, it doesn't have to be linear and everything has to be everything being non-linear makes it more interesting and more fun and more intricate. And so he's planning this giant non-linear scheme, and at the end of it, Megatron shows up, beats the crap out of him, and then sends his body parts to like 4 different facilities. It's hilarious. It is absolutely hilarious. And I have this feeling, though it's not confirmed, let me just see who actually wrote this issue, because it's not in the issue itself, it's in the opening of the hardcover. I have this, it's Stuart Moore, okay. I had this notion that I'm not sure if it is true anymore because it's not written by Simon Furman. But the Transformers comics at this point are getting a lot of flack for being kind of confusing and being kind of short and focusing more on humans and being like not paying off its gratuitous Transformer robot action yet. And it was a little bit of a different thing. It was to use Ramjet's words, non-linear. And so I had this thought, if this issue had anything to do with Simon Furman, which from what I can tell it doesn't, that maybe this is Stuart Moore or someone on the Transformers team just turning Megatron, personifying the fanboys that hated this book into Megatron, and then turning Ramjet into someone like Simon Furman, who's like masterminding this, and he's got this big plan. It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. But nope, fans come in and just like, no, don't do it this way. Don't do it this way. It reads kind of like that. It reads kind of like clearly someone's working out their issues through this character, or at least personifying their issues through this character. I think that's kind of funny, especially because Megatron's so tyrannical. I just think it's a fitting comparison. So yeah, Spotlight Ramjet's got nothing to do with anything. It's interesting, it's kind of fun, but again, just sort of there. After that, you get Spotlight Ultra Magnus, which is really, really good. It's one of my favorites. Spotlight Ultra Magnus basically just deals with Ultra Magnus, who is this transforming space cop that is essentially going around as a duly appointed officer of, I think he calls them the Tyresticors, and he's just going around tracking down different rogues. And so he catches one, and that one says, let's make a deal, because I know where this other guy you're looking for named Scorponok is. And Scorponok is this transformer that goes through other worlds and doesn't obey, to put it in Star Trek terms, he doesn't obey the Prime Directive. He goes to other worlds, he merges his technology with theirs, then sucks the planet dry and leaves. And so he's constantly mixing his tech with other planets that may not be ready for it, or can't utilize it, or something to that effect. And so Ultra Magnus has been searching for him for years, and so he is this kind of unwavering, strong, believes in the law kind of robot. And when he meets this guy, he says, I know where Scorponok is, let's make a deal. He says, fine, I will let you go, and then you'll give me information to Scorponok, which he does. And so he kind of sets up a situation where, like, okay, even if this information doesn't pan out, I can still catch him. So it's more of like him easing his conscience in that way, but he doesn't feel good about it. He doesn't feel good about what he had to do to get there. But then for him, it kind of pays off when he meets Scorponok, and so they have a pretty big clash, and Scorponok gets away. But at the end, he goes back to trying enforcing the law, and other people start saying, I have information, let's make a deal. And so he kind of gets consumed by this need to take out this one guy, that his sort of extremism, that everything is absolutely black and white, has sort of turned him into the ultimate personification of everything that's gray, because he's so unwavering in his quest for one criminal that he's letting others get away. He's being used and manipulated by them, all for information for Scorponok. And it really fits his personality. It's very much in line with what I've seen him in other continuities. It's a good story. It's really interesting. And Ultra Magnus is typically written kind of like a jerk, but here you can see you have a bit more understanding for that. He's a little bit more sympathetic than that. And there is some setup here to other future storylines that we won't quite get into yet because it hasn't happened yet. Then you move on to Spotlight Cup. Funny thing about Spotlight Cup is that there was an issue that when this thing was first printed, the fourth page of Spotlight Cup had no dialogue whatsoever, even though it was supposed to. And so for this reprinting, they put the dialogue back in, but I actually looked up the original issue just to see what much of the difference was, and there really isn't. I almost think it works better without dialogue because it helps with the pacing of the story itself. So Spotlight Cup deals with this Transformer named Cup, and his whole thing is that he used to be this great Transformer, this great Autobot that taught a lot of other Autobots, and at some point he got stuck on a random planet, an unnamed planet that we have no idea where it is or how he's there. And because of how volatile the crystals and atmosphere of that planet is, you can't like beam down and get him, and you can't like fire blasters or anything, or you're going to risk blowing the entire planet up, which is something Cup learns. And so Cup has been stranded on this planet for years and years, and his mind is just gone. And he's a really stubborn kind of Transformer where like he refused to upgrade himself through the years, and so a lot of his parts have become outdated. And so stranded on this planet, he's kind of just breaking down, and every night he hallucinates these monsters coming after him. And his old team that crashed in on the planet with him are all dead, and they're just laying there, and he's like having conversations with them. And when he's being attacked every night, he keeps like shouting to his dead comrades, like, "Why won't you help me?" And he has this refusal to power down, and he's just drained of energon. He's going to blow up at some point. His spark core isn't going to last. And just every night he can't sleep. He always wakes back up and he always has to fight these monsters he sees. And halfway through the issue, you find out they're not monsters. They're Autobots in radiation-resistant armor that have been trying to rescue him. And in doing so, Kup keeps killing the rescue parties. And so this other Autobot that was under his wing that learned everything from him is going on this foolhardy quest, killing his team to try and get this one Autobot back. And so there's this really opening, interesting question of, if Kup was sane, would he want this? Would he want you to spend so much time and so many resources just trying to save one person at the risk of so many other lives? And he can't answer that question because this guy is just so obsessed with the idea of Kup and the idea of him being his teacher, even to the degree that this guy taught Optimus Prime what he knows. And so there's this great reverence for him that you get later in the issue, but you open him up as this kind of this insane, completely unhinged robot. It's really interesting, and it's a really good look into insanity, and particularly about the insanity of war and victimization and such. It's really good. It might be my favorite Spotlight issue, just because it's so different. And by the end of this, Kup is rescued, but you can't really repair him because most of his parts are gone. And he's been without Energon and stuck on the planet for so long, he's got so many psychological scars that they don't know if he'll ever actually wake up and be the guy that they wanted to rescue. And so it's the most fatalistic ending you could have for a story like this. I really, really enjoyed it. It was really interesting. And it was just so different from the rest of these. The next one's Spotlight Mirage, which I don't really have a lot to say on because it's basically this two alternate realities, where on one world, Mirage is this ultimate Decepticon that has taken out all of the Autobots and is kind of strong-arming Megatron into getting more and more power. And in another reality, which I assume is our reality, is Mirage, who is an Autobot that keeps dreaming about this other parallel world. And so these two Mirages of two realities are linked to each other and they're complete opposites, which is interesting. But they don't really do much with it. It's not like a Mirror Universe Star Trek kind of thing. It's not really they meet each other and you see a contrast in who they are, because you don't meet the Autobot Mirage until the very end. And so you never have really a sense of who he is to compare the rest of the story to. And most of the story is just kind of shock value. I don't know what's going on. Why is Mirage killing all the Autobots? And then it's over. And so you don't really have a sense of what the world is or what his stake in it is or what Mirage from our reality really thinks of it. It's interesting, but it's so much more setup and it's so much more, I kind of need to see what the future of this is before I can really talk about it. That Spotlight in particular feels like the first issue to an actual ongoing that we'll probably never get. It's kind of like that. So it's well written enough, it's just there's nothing I'll really latch onto character-wise. And then finally, the last Spotlight in this particular set is Spotlight Optimus Prime. And so Spotlight Optimus Prime deals with Optimus after escalation. And he's kind of terrified at how long this war is going. He's saddened by his defeat at Megatron's hands and how he almost died. And he remembers when he was in infraspace, while he was knocked out during the Megatron fight, that he sensed some other Autobot in that space with him. And so he decides to go off and meet Omega Supreme, I think. He sets off to meet Omega Supreme, who he wants to talk to try and explain what's going on and who that guy was. It turns out that the guy that Optimus Prime saw in infraspace was actually Nova Prime. And Nova Prime was an Autobot around the same time as Omega Supreme that believes that the Cybertronians to be the be-all, end-all of evolution, the greatest possible race, and so he wanted to, quote-unquote, share that with the rest of the world, and it kind of made him into this imperialistic ruler. And he's the guy that's stuck in infraspace right now, and he's got a guy that's got connections to what we're going to see later with Spotlight Galvatron. And that's interesting. And we deal a lot with the Prime legacy and where Optimus is as a person and if he's really prepared to take on this mantle and how long he's really had it. It doesn't answer any questions, it just keeps raising lots of them, and so it makes it for a really interesting peek at what the future of this series would be. It does open up the question of what the Prime legacy is, because there's a page in this where you see all the Primes, and I know later they talk about the 13 original Primes, and you see Sentinel Prime and then Optimus Prime, and then I remember very, very distinctly that in Spotlight Blur, Optimus shows up, and there, before Optimus, was a guy named Zeta Prime. And so this book makes it seem like after Sentinel it went straight to Optimus, but that book made it seem like there was a guy in between. And so I'm just kind of confused on what the Prime legacy is. I would also like to know, like, Nova Prime's relation to all this, just because so much of this mythology is the same and so much of it is different that I don't know how much I can assume about Nova Prime from previous continuities and how much I could just keep blank and going forward. Which is, again, something that comes up with Spotlight Galvatron, where in most continuities Galvatron is a form of Megatron, but in this continuity he's not. And so some of that I just wish was made a little bit more clear. But in trying to talk to Omega Supreme, he gets ambushed by this Combiner Transformer, who I think his name is Monstercon. It's this kind of ridiculously oversized multi-piece Transformer that's just trying to kill Omega Supreme for whatever reason, and is eventually linked back to Nova Prime that Optimus stops. And in so stopping him, the rest of the Autobots start to study him, while Optimus is left with more questions about the nature of the Prime legacy, because he always saw it as this mantle of great honor, of the great discipline, of always being in the moral right, and sort of being like this universal ideal for all Transformers to live up to. And so he had to live up to the example of what the Prime is meant to be. And then finding out that Nova Prime was like this ridiculous imperialist makes him question a lot of that. And then that gets layered on top of his defeat at Megatron's hands in Escalation, and how he doesn't know if he really feels up to leading the Transformers, and it's so a little bit closer to kind of War for Cybertron Transformers animated kind of Optimus that isn't completely steadfast and isn't always right and isn't always on top. I think that's really interesting, and again, a lot of this is, aside from Spotlight Ramjet, a lot of this stuff is set up. But I really like this. This is the end of the second collection, and it's a pretty good cap-off to a really good series of events. I still think Stormbringer is probably the best thing in this trade. And as far as these particular Spotlight reviews go, I think Kup is probably the most interesting, followed closely by Ultra Magnus and Optimus Prime. And all this is essential reading. Aside from Ramjet, all of this is essential reading. So you can't, like, skip any of this. You can't go straight into New Avengers, Transformers, Man and Machine, and you can't go straight into Devastation without having more of a grasp on what's going on here. But this is really good. I really enjoyed it. And they read really quickly. All 6 of these spotlights should take you no more than an hour to go through, which is both good and bad because these are $50 trades, and so you kind of want to like live with them more. But at the same time, they're paced really well, and they're all telling the same amount of story, and they're all telling. They're not overwritten in any way, and they're not underwritten in any way. You really get like a perfect sense of what this book is supposed to be. So yeah, I really like this. This is good stuff. A lot of this is more so just setting up events. A lot of this is more so we're going to see where this leads in the future. But if you're reading up to this point, I would say just keep reading. Transformers comics have, at this point in the review, kind of become, I can't say recommendation or not recommendation, because now it's kind of you're in it for the long haul. So if you keep watching these reviews, chances are you've already read what's happened in the future, or you've already intend to read what's in the future. But all that said, I think this is good. This is definitely a good collection. It's a much better trade altogether than the first volume, because the first volume had Megatron Origin, a bunch of okay spotlights, and then Infiltration, which was okay. And this is more Stormbringer's amazing, Escalation is really good, and all the spotlights in here are good. So this is a much better trade than the first one. So thanks everybody for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with anything I said, and I'll see you next time for another video.